views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
Good morning. I'm Noah Osborne.
And I'm Hayley Gunning.
We're both reporters for NPR affiliate WFUV, and this is Bronx Connections, a collaboration between WFUV, Bronxnet Television, and Norwood News.
This is New York Rising, Waking the Sleepless City. And today you'll be joining us to see how the Bronx is recovering through the COVID-19 pandemic.
We'll take an in-depth look at the recovery of the city through the lens of the bustling Bronx, from some of the bleakest days of the COVID-19 pandemic to where we stand today.
The city was brought to a screeching halt for many New York City residents at the beginning of the pandemic.
Small business owners were placed on the back burner, being fried both financially and mentally.
Schools were faced with all new challenges as they were dismissed from full-time in-person learning.
Despite these challenges, the city that went to sleep last year is waking up, and the Bronx is working to bounce back.
This is New York Rising,
Waking the Sleepless City.
It was a tragic sight to see so many small businesses put on the chopping block through the pandemic. Noah, you had the opportunity to speak with a small business owner, didn't you?
I did, Hayley, and he's the owner of multiple small businesses, one right here on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx's colorful cultural hub of Little Italy, and one just outside of Fordham University's gates. So he's had to pull double duty of sorts with both his barnyard barbecue spot not far from here and Little Italy's own Simon's Deli. As the pandemic dished out a cold serving of uncertainty for many of New York's small businesses, Simon Kajtazi kept cooking. Simon is the owner of Simon's Deli in the Bronx at Arthur Avenue, and today I'm grabbing a word with him to see what it was like to work in the kitchen as the pandemic turned up the heat and what recovery looks like now. It's obvious what the pandemic did to many small businesses. Some were forced to shut down and are now on the road to reopening, but some weren't so lucky because finances for a lot of these small businesses just plummeted. But let's touch on the road less traveled. Let's talk about mental impact. When the governor said that, indoor dining had to stop due to the pandemic, what was going through your head with that, knowing that you wouldn't get to see your customers sit down, converse, laugh, and enjoy themselves? How did that feel for you?
I felt bad for them because they couldn't enjoy their meal nice and hot. They had to take it home. It impacted so much of the customers that we came and they came to the store. They ate, they enjoyed themselves, we talked, we had fun. It was hard.
And seeing so many small businesses meet unfortunate ends such as permanent closures, did it ever occur to you that it could have been you? And what did you do to ensure that it wasn't you?
Well, thank God we had other businesses around us that helped each other out. We have my brother has a pizzeria, my other brother has a restaurant, my other brother has a bar, and we just helped each other out, whatever it was that we could help each other out with, whether it was either with money or with helping us out with workers, because everybody was scared to come into work. It was hard. It was really hard.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that help. When the pandemic was just slicing away at these small businesses, did you find it increasingly difficult to stay financially afloat, or was that sort of help able to keep you above water?
No, it helped. It didn't help us at all because we couldn't open up at all sometimes, because you couldn't go inside. Nobody knew what was going on. Everybody was scared to get sick. Workers were scared to get sick. It was very hard because you didn't know what was going on.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned workers. Let's bring the workers into this a bit. So when the pandemic hit its darkest days with, the cases, the hospitalizations, and the deaths just soaring, how did your workers react to any of this? Did you find that there were any sort of issues with staffing? And what about your customers? What did the sort of staffing situation look like when all of this was just hitting, so hard at that time?
Well, everybody was scared. Nobody knew what was going on. But we ensured everybody that by putting on the masks and making sure everybody was 6 feet apart, whether it was the workers, customers, even though our place is small, we could only fit a handful of people inside. But we did try to keep everybody apart as much as they can. So like this, we can ensure the workers to be safe and the customers as well.
I'm also glad that you mentioned safety. Let's look back a bit to when the governor said that outdoor dining could be a viable option for restaurant owners. What reprieve, if any, did that option offer you at all? Being able to have customers, still come to the business, but, sit outside and enjoy their meals. What reprieve, if any, did that offer you?
It helped and it didn't help.
Get into that a bit.
Because you have outdoor dining, you can't enclose it all. So you got people freezing, eating whatever they're eating that's supposed to be hot. So how could the customers enjoy that? You got times there was outside or no outside, nobody came outside because it was too cold. And a lot of things were scarce, like heaters, warmers, or whatever it was that you could try to keep the customers as comfortable as possible to enjoy their meal. You couldn't find them. You couldn't find nothing.
I'm sorry about that. That sounds like it was a really taxing experience. I'd also like to now touch base a bit on the financial standpoint. Like from a financial standpoint, how do you think the government stimulus packages helped or, influenced the sort of, atmosphere in the restaurant? How do you think that sort of, came into play in terms of like what the atmosphere in the restaurant was like? Did it help? Did it hurt? And could you say that the stimulus packages had any impact on what staffing might look like?
Well, it helped a lot, and it didn't help a lot. It helped a lot, meaning like you got some of the workers that took advantage of this stuff. I'm not coming back to work. I'm getting paid anyway. So now you got, today, you got so many people that just don't want to go back to work at all because why? The government is taking care of everybody. Okay, fine. You want to take advantage of it, no problem. But the businesses are going to suffer, nothing else. So I'm not saying for the government not to continue giving these stimulus packages. Help out the poor that are sick or elderly, the people who really, really need it. But you got people that are wearing $1,200 sneakers and they're getting these packages for what?
Yeah, I definitely understand. It's something that I've heard a bit about too. Now, I'd like to take a moment to look at the now. With cases are on the rise again, hospitalizations and deaths are also steadily climbing, and the governor even signed an executive order saying that outdoor dining could be the law of the land for another year. So I'd just like to get your reaction to that. How do you feel about, having that option of outdoor dining again for another year with all of this energy being put into, bringing restaurants back to this pre-pandemic normal? Do you think that having outdoor dining for another year would help push you forward past this pandemic, or do you think it'll hold you back?
It's gonna help both ways. The summertime, it's gonna help out a lot. You're outdoors, weather's beautiful. I'd rather be eating hot food in a hot temperature than eating hot food in a cold temperature. But once it gets cold, what are you gonna do? You can't enclose the place because it's like you eating inside. So it's a win-win and a not no-win situation for some restaurants.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And then also, as outdoor dining gained in popularity during the pandemic, what do you think needs to happen to get patrons back in the restaurant as opposed to sitting outside all of the time?
Well, if you want to get people to come out more, I mean, you have to give more leeway to people. With this pandemic now that's on a rise right now, you don't know who's sick, what's sick. They got a coronavirus, now they got the Delta virus. How are you going to know who's got what? How do you even determine? You got the Delta, you got the Corona. Are my customers safe? Are my employees safe? So you take the test, you take the temperature. Either which way, you sit in the same place, same room. Air is flowing everywhere.
Yeah. Well, this next question I'd like to address to both of you, and it has to do with everything we have here, your restaurant, the seating area. What do you think the future of this business looks like? Like, where do you see all of this, everything you've worked for, at this deli? Where do you see all of this when this pandemic is said and done?
Hopefully, we will be out of the woods, and hopefully, everything gets back together, everything goes back together, meaning like everything's gone. Hopefully, it works out.
Yeah. And then also, I think I'd also like to ask as well. I think this is sort of like a slam dunk sort of question. How is the restaurant or the experience in the restaurant or the deli been now in comparison to how everything was at the height of the pandemic? What sort of differences do you see? Do things look better?
We see a lot more business. It's a lot better. But now, coming September 13th, when there's going to be mandates on customers coming in, who knows what happens with that? Because, like they say, there's 50% people vaccinated, 50% not vaccinated. what are you going to do now? You're going to really lose the customers? It's hard to force customers to get vaccinated.
Yeah, and then let's also touch base on the whole Delta variant experience. So I know that you had said that business had been looking better. Does that business, with business looking better, does that still include where we are now in terms of Delta variant? Like, would you say with this whole Delta experience, does business still look good in comparison to when we were, assumingly climbing out of, the pandemic? Like, how does that look?
We're still looking good. A lot of businesses are still looking good. I have a few friends that have businesses that are doing good still. But now it's all about September 13th when the city comes down on everybody for these vaccine cards. And that's the only thing that's going to really tell how bad the Delta virus is or how bad they're going to make it look like it is. So that's going to ruin a lot of businesses, and that's going to help a lot of businesses because you got a mom and pop store that doesn't have outdoor dining. How are they going to live if people don't got vaccinated cards? Now you're going to have a whole bunch of people you're going to ask them for that vaccinated cards, then they're not going to tell you. They're going to ignore you. You got people that don't care, that don't want to know nothing. What are you going to do with those people? You can't fight them. They're your customers, and you don't even know. God forbid you fight them with the wrong person, turns around, shoots you, or kills you. God forbid. You got to have security guards now in restaurants. We can't even pay the bills now. Most of the bills, we can't afford a security guard at the thing to ask for IDs or vaccination cards. If they say no, what are you going to do? Call the cops? It's going to be hard because you know how many cops would have to be in restaurants? Oh, we got a customer that doesn't want to show the vaccination card. How are you going to kick them out? They're longtime customers that have been helping you out throughout the whole pandemic. Now you want to throw them out because they want a vaccine card? It's a win-win and not a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, and I'm glad because I sort of see this as like the second time that the date September 13th was mentioned, and I noticed that it invokes a lot of emotion in you. So I'd like to dive a bit deeper into what September 13th means for you at the moment, what that could mean for a lot of other business owners. What does it mean to you? What value, or what disdain does that number in September, or that date September 13 bring to you? What comes to mind when you hear that?
Well, I'm not gonna get into no conspiracy theories and all that other stuff, but the number 13 means a lot of things in the outer world. Whoever wants to take it the way they want to take it, but I'm gonna stay away from that. But it is what it is. That's the date they chose. It could have been a different date, but I guess it is what it is. It's going to be hard for everybody that, like I said, that are going to be able to try to control the customers of coming into the restaurants and saying, give me your vaccination card. It's going to be hard. Believe me. A lot of people are not going to comply with it. And I'm not saying I don't blame them, but what are you going to do? Turn them away? Close your shop up? You got family, you got kids, you got bills.
Restaurants were certainly faced with many challenges, and I'd like to thank all small business owners as they make it through this pandemic.
Definitely.
Greetings and welcome to Bronxnet. I'm Hayley Gunning, and this is the Bronx After COVID. Today, I have the pleasure to speak with veteran educator, Bronx resident, and principal of Tapco Middle School and High School, Ron Link. Mr. Link, thank you so much for being with us today on Bronxnet.
My pleasure, Hayley.
The turmoil unleashed upon principals and educators such as you from the COVID pandemic has been unprecedented. How are things looking for you right now as you head back into the classroom?
Well, I relied on the Department of Education to provide me guidance, and then on the strength and ingenuity and dedication of my staff.
What were your greatest fears concerning the onset of the pandemic?
My greatest fear was around keeping people safe because it was such a great unknown in the beginning, and really we were hyper-vigilant in the beginning. It was almost, I don't want to say comical because it was a very serious situation, but we had Lysol, we had wipes, we were spraying down everything. People were coming in to pick up computers and they had to go through a haze of disinfectant, and people were wearing gloves. So we were being very, very cautious and responding to information as it was coming out in real time, always guided by what the Department of Education was sharing with us, but also relying on our own instincts and research as it was coming down from the federal, state, and other levels.
And did any of your teachers contract COVID, and if so, what was that like?
Yes, it was harrowing. It was harrowing. Thank God they all survived, but it was very emotional. It was stress-inducing, and we kept in touch. Everyone kept in touch, and I think that's the key to getting through this pandemic moving forward is support, mutual support, empathy, but beyond empathy, compassion. And compassion means that you help. And I think that's the key that got us to where we are today.
How were the parents, caretakers, and students handling it as new details emerged practically every day? How did they decipher those conflicting reports?
That's an excellent question, Hayley. It was everything was happening to all of us in real time. So parents had to rely on us for information because, as you said, there was a lot of conflicting reports coming out in the media and things that were shared anecdotally between people. But we had what was called a connectivity team that made daily outreach by phone. They would make hundreds of calls every day. And then also we had our virtual contact through the school website, where the latest information, again from the Department of Education, was posted, and we had people answering phone calls as well as making them, in addition to lastly responding to emails.
What sources did you rely on for the most current information and details on a daily basis?
Well, I relied on what came through what's known as the Principal's Digest, and then individual emails from departments within the Department of Education. That really was based on what was coming down from the federal and state level. So those were constant, and they were always up to date. The thing was sometimes they changed rather rapidly because the conditions and the information that we were learning about the virus was becoming more precise and more accurate. So it was really like, again, keeping your ears open, keeping your, I have to say it, keeping your heart open, and really being there for each other, which is, again, how we're going to make it.
Mr. Link, do you fear that lost time in school physically for the students at TAPCO and all schools will have a long-term effect on them, both educationally and emotionally?
Wow, that's a big question. My hope is that a lot was learned by students, which we know because we saw it in working with them. They have a lot more oomph and resolve and strength that they probably didn't even know they had. And they'll think back on this time how much they actually did learn about being self-reliant, depending on others, being able to pivot, and that's what life is about, being able to handle when curveballs get thrown your way. So I do have concerns about what's being termed, the gaps, but I think that by being, again, open and aware to what their needs are when they come to school, and again, we've done a good job of preparing for that through the resources provided to us by the Department of Education, as well as we've hired additional guidance counselors, school social workers, made new connections with community-based organizations. We're hiring a community associate. So it's really being responsive to what their needs are, both socially, emotionally, and academically. So it's, yes, I am concerned about it, but I am confident that we will be able to provide the best that's available because I have such a fantastic staff.
As the principal of TAPCO and as we all attempt to get back to normal, what are your goals, expectations, and hopes for your students and teachers?
again, an excellent question. Those are the things that keep me up at night. But really, I think the overriding goal is to provide a safe and supportive learning environment that honors where people are across the spectrum of how this has impacted them emotionally, the academic learning gaps, really being aware and understanding of that, and then providing the support that they need after we get to know through baseline surveys and other metrics, and then taking benchmarks along the way to see if what we're doing in response to that is effective. So my goal is to provide a safe and supportive environment, meet people where they're at, honor their individuality, honor their culture. It's really about being, as I said earlier, compassionate, which is empathy with the help added in.
My gratitude to you, Mr. Link, for this interview. Have a safe, healthy, and peaceful school year.
Thank you, Hayley. All the best to you, too. Thanks.
Absolutely jarring to hear about the struggles public schools had to endure in the landscape of COVID, but it's definitely encouraging to see that we've learned much about the road to recovery wherever it may lead. Speaking of roads, it's definitely been a rocky one for mass transit. I got the chance to speak with an MTA employee about what it was like to be in the driver's seat as the pandemic slammed the brakes on mass transit. As the pandemic rolled through New York, the wheels kept turning for Ann-Nesha Luke, a bus driver over at the Bronx at the West Farm Square bus depot. Today I'm checking in with Ann-Nesha to get a glimpse of what it was like to get behind the wheel during some of the most uncertain days of the pandemic and what the road to recovery looks like now. Let's roll. So take us back to March of 2020 when the pandemic had first started making waves. What was that like for you, waking up in the morning, kickstarting your day and the days of countless other New York City commuters? What was a day in the life like during the pandemic for you?
The day of the life of a pandemic for me was very unnerving. Coming to work, don't know somebody coming on the bus. Because at the beginning, we wasn't allowed to have masks, and people didn't take it that seriously, so they didn't have no masks also. So, who's coming on the bus had a virus. So it was kind of like, nervous, touch and go.
So, get into a bit of that, that experience of the caution. How was that for you, taking all of that caution? How did that seep into your experience?
Well, it wasn't that difficult for me because, my stuff is upstairs on the bus. I have a bus bag. So my bus bag just got bigger. That's all. I have wipes, so I disinfect, I clean the mirrors and stuff like that. It's just me doing it. The only thing that I did extra is maybe wiping after each trip. I would wipe down the rails, the fear box and stuff like that. That's what changed for me. Because I was always super clean. So I just got super, super cleaner.
yeah, I definitely understand. Yeah. So then there's also another big first, which was the fall of ridership. These cultural hubs of New York life where people would gather, to move. It's a moving city. And they were just empty. Has that ever been a part of your experience?
The Bronx is different from Manhattan because you have a different class of people. Manhattan, I'm sure, if you speak to a driver from Manhattan, that was like a ghost town. But the Bronx is different because you have more bodega workers, discount stores that they're still going. The only thing that you will miss is like school kids or whatever the case may be. It was down, but not a lot, like I know opposed to Manhattan.
Yeah, I definitely understand. And then I'd also like to hop back a bit to the changes that you had mentioned earlier, how you were wiping things down between trips. How is what you do, maybe in addition to that as an MTA employee sort of changed in terms of the pandemic? Have you had to make any compromises that weren't there before in comparison to now?
Not really for me per se. Not really, because to me, honestly speaking, you're supposed to be clean. You're supposed to wash your hands. These are the things that you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So it's not nothing brand new for me. I don't know about somebody else who's dirty and nasty. That must be brand new for them. But for me, it's right up my alleyway.
Yeah. And I'd also like to say that when I was sort of looking at this pandemic, it's sort of like we've been rolling on a roller coaster. We were riding high just maybe a month or two ago when cases were starting to fall and, the uptick in vaccinations was going up. Cases were falling, hospitalizations were falling, deaths were falling. That was before Delta, obviously. So take us there. What was that like, that little moment, before Delta, the new Delta variant? Were things a little calmer? Were things a little bit easier? Did things seem a little more normal?
Honestly speaking, thinking about it, normal, to me, it's like a gray area, that word normal right now, honestly speaking, because the CDC gonna say, oh, it's okay to have a mask here, you can't have a mask there. It's confusing to the public. And I noticed that they would come on the bus and they wouldn't have their mask, they would be lax. And I would tell them this is recyclable air. And they'd be like, oh, okay, I understand, I'll put the mask on. But when de Blasio, that's his name, right? The mayor?
Yes.
De Blasio had the press conference about the mandates and stuff. The next day, the very next day, everybody had their masks on. It's like they saw the importance of everything.
What was the atmosphere of the bus like during that time? Like when we were talking about like how you said that they were, you know, looking a little more lax. What was the atmosphere of the bus like, your riders at the time, like before Delta, or even like now in comparison? Like what was it like? Did it seem calmer? Were there more riders, more people wearing masks? What was that sort of atmosphere like? Did things just seem a little calmer?
Well, when they had changed the rules or whatever, they was calmer, yes, to a certain, but they was calmer, they was relaxed to a certain extent, but you gotta give them, you gotta understand their perspective also. You've been locked up for a year. Who wanna be outside? They probably kicked the door open because they was ready to get outside. So I understand the mentality of the whole situation also, but it's just that you have to be safe because what you do affect others and you could be bringing it back home to your family.
Yeah, I understand. Let's take a moment to look at the now a bit in comparison to when, you know, we're at the height of this pandemic. How has your role as a frontline worker now been sort of different or maybe even the same in comparison to like how it was at the height of the pandemic? What are those sort of differences, if there are any, that you notice, and what are the most noticeable ones?
Pertaining to my job itself?
Yeah, like your role, you know, during
my
the
role,
pandemic.
it makes me, I mean, before being a bus driver, you would think that, you know, doing it for so long is like you seem unimportant. But during this whole entire thing about pandemic, you see that you're actually validated, you're actually important to the whole entire scheme of things. Everybody has played a role, you know, the supermarket worker. Because I had to go through it. I did join the long lines also, didn't you? Everybody who thought it was minuscule right now, it's like you see how important your role was. And that's how I look at it. I'm not only a bus driver. I took a person here, there, and everywhere when they were scared to go on Uber. I was important, and that's how I look at it.
Where would you say you would see, you know, yourself, the bus, your passengers, the MTA? Where would you see that in a post-pandemic world?
In a post-pandemic world, that's an interesting question. Post-pandemic world. Honestly, because I'm speaking from my point of view, it's hard to see what the future is going to be like. Honestly, it's hard to see what anything is going to be like because this corona has affected people in so much different ways. It had affected us in so much different ways. So that's like a hard question for me to be specific about. You know, I could just hope that everybody's safe and everybody's protecting, everybody do what they're supposed to do.
It's great to see the engines continue to rev up for public transportation, and not just public transit, but the entire city in general.
Indeed. I think it really serves as testament to the resilience of the city, especially the Bronx. The pandemic put restaurants in hot water, but Simon's Deli didn't melt.
And schools were faced with all new challenges, but Principal Link continues to write a whole new chapter for Tapco Middle School and High School.
And although the pandemic put the MTA on an unexpected detour, bus and train operators kept rolling.
In a situation like this, nobody knows quite where the road to recovery from this pandemic will lead us next.
But we do know that no matter where we go, New York City is fighting against the crisis of the times, and the Bronx's recovery is testament to the city's resilience. That's all the time we have for today, but I'd like to thank you for sticking with us, just as you've been able to stick with us through this pandemic. I'm Noah Osborne.
And I'm Hayley Gunning.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Rising, Waking the Sleepless City.
Stay safe and have a great day.